Shabbat Shalom. Good morning, everybody. We are here, our beloved clergy team, in our Gantt Chapel, and we are taping on Wednesday, May 15th. And colleagues, the topic I want to talk about today is the category of madness. It just feels like there is a lot of madness going on in the Jewish world, especially. I'll just share a story with you from yesterday. Yesterday I was in Bentonville, Arkansas. That's not a sentence that I've ever said before. But yesterday I was in Bentonville, Arkansas. Shur and I were there for a little getaway. And Bentonville is a town that is in northwest Arkansas. Northwest Arkansas is at the union of Arkansas and Missouri and Oklahoma. It had been the poorest part of the country, the Dust Bowl, and now it is extremely thriving. It is the place where Walmart was founded. It's the capital of Walmart, the world headquarters of Walmart. Sam Walton built this place up, and it's now a place of museums and art museums and beautiful bike paths and amazing restaurants and foodies, etc. And we have been told by somebody who's writing a biography of Sam Walton, you have to go to Bentonville, Arkansas, and see how the Dust Bowl is just like the most thriving place. And we're there, and there is it's a really cool area, great restaurants, and a really cool bookstore. It got an independent bookstore, and all kinds of cool topics and titles. So we walk into the bookstore, and on the bookshelf is like the employees' picks. There's a pick about Israel and Palestine in Bentonville, Arkansas, which, did I tell you, was Arkansas and Oklahoma, right? And it's a very economically challenged area, thriving again. And I'm looking at this place in what I thought would be the South, deep South, a rural area. It's a nice blue city in an otherwise rural area, Arkansas, that would be broadly supportive of Israel. And in Bentonville, Arkansas, the staff picks about Israel-Palestine are 6 books that are entirely all from a Palestinian point of view. So I asked them, I said to the salesperson, I'd like to explore what do you have about Israel-Palestine from an Israeli point of view. And she said, I think we have something by Noam Chomsky, who is famously anti-Israel. I said, well, that's not really from an Israel point of view. Do you have anything from an Israel point of view? No, but we have all these from the Palestinian point of view. And it just struck me that even in the deep South, this is not Berkeley, and this is not Yale, and this is not Columbia, and this is not coastal elites. This is in a very red part of the country. 6 out of 6 are about how Israel is wrongly formed and immoral. All 6 have that position. And it just, so the category that I think about is the category of Elie Wiesel's teaching at BU, madness. What happens when madness descends? And when in Bentonville, as well as Yale and Columbia and Berkeley and UCLA, the prevailing opinion is there should be no Israel. And you can't, and you ask the bookstore, do you have a book about Israel? They don't have a book about Israel, just about how Israel shouldn't exist in Bentonville, Arkansas. So I want to talk about the category of madness from Elie Wiesel's teaching as set forth by Ariel Burger in his book, Witness. So let's thank God for the gift of learning Torah together. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, asher kitshanu mitzvotav v'tzivanu la'asok b'divrei Torah. Va'arevna Adonai Eloheinu et divrei Toratcha b'finu u'b'fi amcha beit Yisrael, v'nihya anachnu v'tzatza'enu v'tzatza'ei amcha beit Yisrael, כולנו יודעי שמך ולמדי תורתך לשמה, ברוך אתה אדוני המלמד תורה לעמו ישראל, ברוך אתה אדוני אלוהינו מלך העולם, אשר בחר בנו מכל העמים ונתן לנו את תורתו, ברוך אתה אדוני נותן התורה. So in Witness by Ariel Burger, he brings basically 2 Hasidic parables. One is a Hasidic parable plus a variation, and then there's a second one. The first one is as a Rabbi Nachman parable called the tainted grain, and I'm wondering, Elisa, could you read the parable of the tainted grain by Rabbi Nachman from Ariel Burger's book?
Sure. Once an astrologer king saw in the stars that anyone who would eat of the coming harvest would go mad. He called in his viceroy and friend to ask for his advice. "Sire," replied the counselor, "you and I shall eat only last year's harvest, which is untainted, and so we shall remain sane." But the king replied, "I do not accept your proposal. How can we separate ourselves from our people? To remain the only sane people among a nation of madmen, they will think we are the ones who are mad. Instead, you and I shall eat of the tainted grain and shall enter into madness with our people." The king thought for a moment, then said, "We must, however, at least recognize our malady. Therefore, you and I shall mark each other's foreheads with a sign, and every time we look at one another, we shall remember that we are mad."
Thank you, Lisa. So let's talk about this parable of the tainted grain through two lenses. First, pshat, what does it say in its own context? And then, of course, drash, what does it say to us today? Pshat, what is this parable of the tainted grain about?
It's about leadership, how leaders either connect or don't connect with their constituents. So there's some ways in which a leader will connect, by being with the people, as opposed to separating themselves from the people. I think that's the pashat anyway.
In other words, if the people are focused on X, and X is the preoccupation of the people, the leader somehow has got to be able to internalize X energy to understand X, and therefore has to kind of enter into the world of that madness or that obsession or that preoccupation.
Yeah, at least from the basis of being able to understand where the constituents are.
And Dan, as you go with that, what's the idea of the sign on the forehead?
I think it's useless, because I think if they're mad, they're not going to recall what the sign is for.
Oh, okay.
That's a logical answer anyway.
So you're saying that in the end, once people kind of succumb to the madness, or they enter into the world of madness, the notion of the safety valve in the story, which is there's a sign on the forehead that reminds us that we're mad, but we know that we're mad, that you're saying that's not effective, because once you're mad, and you kind of lose the non-mad world, is what you're saying. Okay. Other reads on this shot of the story.
I would not read it about leadership. I would read it about mob mentality and about the cultural milieu that you are soaking in a way that impacts everyone, and that the mob mentality, the cultural scene that you're in is so powerful that a leader would be deposed if they are separate from it. And I think that's something that we're seeing in our world today.
And how do you see that play out today?
That I think we see politicians who are espousing positions that they did not hold 10 years ago vehemently, positions that are totally opposite what they claim to support in their careers previously, because they see it as advantageous given the current political climate. And I think that a lot of what we're seeing is people trying to be, I don't want to say lowest common denominator, but it does feel like the lowest common denominator of what is selling, and trying to be meeting the moment at the level where the majority, what they see as a majority, are at.
So you didn't say this, but I'm hearing your lens applied to, let's say, the national political climate in America. Is that what you meant?
I definitely see it applying to our political climate. I see it applying to the Israeli political climate. I think we're in a world that is not we're all after likes. We're all after public opinion, and it's a way that creates challenge.
Right. I mean, it also seems like this would have implications in terms of the college protests and the lack of consequences. The kids could violate laws of the college, violate laws of the state in which the college is located, get arrested, and then have no consequences because of a mob mentality.
And because the adults on the scene are trying to be with the people,
Right.
with their people, not
So the madness has descended so that, and this is not one particular college, this is universities writ large, that the administrations of these universities are also affected by the same madness that has descended, and therefore they don't apply the rules that used to exist in a pre-mad world. Just like in politics, the political climate has changed, and people don't apply the rules that they used to have in a pre-mad world. Before we leave you, Elisa, where does that leave us? If that's the world that we're living in, does this story, I mean, that's so dire that the human soul hungers for some kind of relief from that direness, and the relief in the story is the sign on the forehead that at least we remember that we're mad. Does that work for you? And if not, what is the ray of hope in a world gone mad?
So I don't actually think that the sign on the forehead is a sign of hope. It actually feels to me like a marker of what once was rather than what is, and we don't actually see what happens. We don't see if they're able to maintain that awareness or not. And Dan, I think your comment about not, like, once you're mad, you don't have the ability to recognize the sign is really real. I think the power of this story is that madness or hysteria can shift at any moment, and so it's about shifting the whole groundswell and not shifting just the top, just the leaders.
And before we leave you, do you see any hope in this parable as you have interpreted it?
The parable, I don't think it's about hope or not. I think it's about the forces that are acting on us. And I think that as I look at our world, I don't know, I don't know that I would characterize everything as madness as much as there are elements that concern me. I think that it's really important for us to listen and to practice listening and to hear and to be like the king and not just be like, that's crazy and I'm out. We have some work to do to eat the tainted grain and to figure out what's going on and to be more a part of the community to help work our way out of this madness.
Elias or Michelle, what are your glosses on this parable of the tainted grain?
So I like the story very much. I think it's very real and cruel in a way. I understand that the context of this was obviously referring to the Holocaust, but in this day and age, I cannot avoid thinking about how many times. First of all, we have to clarify that anybody who is on either side will see the other side as madness. Okay? The regular people will see that the other are madness, but then the ones who are opposed to the madness see that they are the madness. That being said, second, I cannot stop thinking about that story. I don't remember who told the story about that there was a few Palestinian workers from Gaza working at a kibbutz in Israel all the time. And they thought they were friends with Israelis. The Israelis believed that they were very close friends. They had dinner at their homes. And then that family was the first that was killed by them. So that story and other stories that I read over the years and decades about, political things, it's a story about, in a way, doing a little twist, like infiltrators, people who get inside and pretend to be something, and they are not. So it's a cruel side of the story that I cannot stop thinking about.
Michelle, what's your voice on this story?
Well, you asked about the hope here, and I agree with Elisa that this first telling of this story is pretty bleak, right? All we can do is enter into this madness, and maybe every once in a while we'll realize that something is wrong, something is off. We'll know enough to know that we're not okay,
Right.
and there's sort of no resolution. There's no opportunity. There's not a future that one could say, someday, maybe not, right? Who knows what they'll make of that sign. The second telling of it to me was in a way much more hopeful, in the sense that in the second teaching, right, the end is actually that there's enough grain for one person from last year.
Right.
And the king eats the bad grain and goes mad, but assigns this this viceroy to be able to go from town to town to try to remind people. And this idea that, like, if we can only find someone right to hold on to some kernel of whatever objective truth is, then maybe we have a chance that someday all of us can hear that voice crying and calling out. And of course, that's the frustrated voice of the prophet that never is heard. We read Haftarah after how you often make this point. Haftarah after Haftarah after Haftarah is all about the prophets, shouting from the rooftops, and they're never heard, right? But we keep doing it, and we keep reading it, and this second telling feels to me like a call to us to try to reach for and hold an existential truth that is beyond the mob.
So I just want to read out loud the second rendering of this that you just adverted to. But in this one, the king tells his viceroy there is just enough of the previous year's untainted grain to eat and remain sane. He offers this store of grain to the viceroy and says, "You will remain the only sane person in all the land, but there is one condition. You must leave the palace and wander as a beggar from town to town, from village to village. Everywhere you go, you must shout in all the marketplaces and from all the rooftops, 'Remember my people, that you are all mad.'" So if that's what passes for hope, we got some grim times here. Here's what I want to just connect this now more explicitly to our world today. It just feels like in campus after campus, it just feels like when in the Bentonville bookstore, where there's nothing about Israel except for Palestinian narratives, that the reigning narrative now, the new grain, is Israel has no right to exist. And so we clergy and the places like Temple Emmanuel are shouting in the world, no, Israel has a right to exist, Israel has a right to exist, Israel has a right to exist. That first of all feels like madness, that 76 years later we have to do that. Hey, we are people too. Hey, we are entitled to a homeland. Hey, wait a minute, what about the Holocaust? Did you see the Holocaust exhibit? Did you see the Holocaust movie? And that we're reduced to that. I kind of really feel like this viceroy who's in a world of tainted grain, in a world where it's just obvious that Israel has no right to exist, that we're shouting from the rooftops and being ignored. So like I left this bookstore thinking, okay, so what am I going to do? So I'm gonna write an email to them, and I'm gonna send them a list of 5 or 6 books that they could read that will tell Israel's story from Israel's point of view. And then I'm like the viceroy in this second parable, which is ineffective. Where's that going to go? And so what? So Michelle, I guess my question to you is, what do these parables, the first one and the second one, tell us about how we are to conduct ourselves now?
Why is that ineffective? I actually find a little bit of positive purpose in what you just suggested. Now, it may feel like a letter is a small thing, but by the way, we talked about this when we talked about the wicked child and the 4 children, and all of us see the other as the wicked child, and we don't want to. It's hard for us to hear whatever we deem the other side as well. So there is some level, at which it perhaps behooves us to pick up one of those 6 books while we ask at the same time for them to be having our 6 books there as well. Because if we're to ever get out of the madness, it has to be a sense in which we're not just trying to displace each other, but we're trying to move forward. And I feel you. I hear that sense of like this world overtaken and not hearing us.
Right.
And I think from the very beginning, from October 7th, that protest sign so speaks to me. Like I can see your pain. Why can't you see mine? The move is not, get rid of all of this, anybody else who's telling a different story. I think the move is let's try to add to that story with our story in a way that ultimately creates a story that everybody can find some manner of truth in.
Right. Right. Only one problem with that. From what I have seen and heard in our own zip code in Newton, it doesn't really work. Like when the mayor was trying to reframe the Nakba exhibit in the library, the framing of the mayor was this going to be a marketplace of ideas and it's going to be a dialogue and different communities will share their views. I don't believe it's worked out that way. The reports that I've heard from the opening were 2 groups shouting at each other, etc. So I love the idea in theory that you have your 6 books, we have our 6 books, I'll read your books, you'll read my books, and we'll educate each other and we'll go forward. But it just feels like in the real world, part of the disease of madness is that you lose your sense of hearing and your sense of listening.
But
Can I pose the question here? As all of you know, I have a son in Colombia, and he experienced bad times, not personally, but in general, through the whole year, the experience. And I'm a huge supporter of Israel. I have relatives, I have cousins, I have friends that I grew up with. That being said, 2 questions that I have. Is really everybody protesting at the universities? Protesting and advocating for the destruction of Israel? I don't think so. Is everybody protesting and advocating for death to the Jews? No. All right? So if we are going to enter that world that we call it madness, we have to really see things in the way they are. All right? They are protesting for divesting from Israel, mostly in divesting from Israel. And occasionally you have a lot of crazy people who say death to the Jews and all that stuff, but not everybody protesting wants to destroy Israel.
But Elias,
and if that is the question, if you would say, yes, let's destroy Israel, we never talk about why there are so many Jewish kids in favor of this protest. Right. We have to examine that as well.
That's a symptom of the madness that Jewish kids are joining these protests. I think that's a symptom of
I
the
don't
madness.
know.
I think it's
I think they
madness.
might have learned it from Elie Wiesel. He points out, he takes the girl here in this reading that you gave us. He takes the girl who is she from Zimbabwe? Where's she from? And he wants her to tell her story, and he says very, very clearly here, I told you in class that you must tell your story. This is because if even one person learns from it how to be more human, you will have made your memories into a blessing. We must turn our suffering into a bridge so that others must suffer less.
Right.
Which is so beautiful. This is what we believe. We must turn our suffering into a bridge so that others might suffer less.
Who could argue with that? But Elias, when you, if I heard you right, about, like BDS is about tarring and feathering and singling out Israel for unique opprobrium, and also to destroy Israel economically. to make it a pariah so that people stop doing business with Israel. That is a death knell for the Jewish state. So, right, no. So that's a death knell for the Jewish state.
But
so
the kids are not thinking that. The kids on college campuses, and I think this is really important, their perspective is that BDS is a way that we can use finances to shape what the Israeli government is doing. They see this war as causing huge casualties and not having a plan and not having a strategy. They are powerless to change that, but they are powerful enough to change economic investment in the country. And with enough economic pressure, their perspective is that Israel will change. I don't think that it's really important to hear that. It's really important to hear that, because when we just label that as madness, when we just label that as Israel hating, when we label that as they want to end Israel, we can't hear where they're coming from. And actually, the sense that this war is being waged in a really terrible way, that's real. That's shared by Israelis. That's shared by us. Like, we have a concern about how it's happening. That's valid. And we have to be able to hear that. We can't just say that's madness.
Right, but what is madness, Elisa, is... This to me is the heart of the madness. The Sunday that Noah went to Israel, Michelle and I were meeting, and on Michelle's cell phone were stories of Hamas sending missiles from Rafah into Israel. Those missiles that Hamas sent from Rafah into Israel killed 5 Israeli soldiers and also wounded and maimed others, okay? And Israel, therefore, was being baited, whatever a stronger word than baited is, that Israel had to go in to stop that because it has a duty to defend its citizens. What's madness is that entire provocation is lopped off the story. The media doesn't talk about it. The campus protesters don't talk about it. The BDS crowd doesn't talk about it. They just talk about what Israel going into Rafah. They don't talk about Hamas sending missiles from Rafah, which had the effect of killing innocent Israeli soldiers. And the fact that that is not part of the story is madness. And so talking about BDS without talking about Hamas, which triggered this whole thing, feels like madness to me. And it also feels like when I hear you guys talking about, well, we just have to understand the BDS and da-da-da, et cetera.
I never said BDS.
Well,
I
want to
said
say,
college
I was saying understand where the kids
Right.
are coming from, and that's a really different, and I would also say there is a space to say Israel was provoked and they are choosing a response that may be not the response that absolutely needs to be. And I think those are, there's space in that. I'm not saying, I'm actually just saying listen to where people are coming
What's
from.
so interesting to me about this story that you brought is that in both cases, the king opts to go inward, right? Opts to lose himself in order to try to understand that which is not understandable. I mean, frankly, I find what's happening on college campuses terrifying, infuriating, madness making. I don't have an emotional frame to put the danger that I feel we are facing right now as a Jewish people.
Would you say it's
on
alarming?
college? It's alarming. And right, what's so interesting to me about this text and about Elie Wiesel is that he challenges me here, because by bringing this text, he's asking me to move perhaps beyond my fear of what might happen if I try to understand, and to catch a little of the madness so that I might have the possibility of moving. And wait, but the second one tells me, right, it's important that all of us understand and find ourselves in that madness, but somebody has to remember. And so I have both. This story is so challenging because it gives me both sides. It gives me both the idea that the only way to encounter a world that is alarming and not understandable is to join that world. And then it also gives me that the only way to understand a world that is alarming is to try to find that existential truth and hold on to it no matter what, and be that witness that calls out against it. And both things he's giving us here. And I think that's a really, I think it's so many more questions than answers in
Right.
this story.
Let me. That's a good. That's a perfect.
I just want to respond to what Elias said really quickly,
Yeah.
which is that Elias, you're saying that it maybe perhaps be a small number of people that are protesting, and on the other hand, that's what's heard. The squeaky wheel gets the grease. So what's heard is that even though it's a small number, there's so many. The silence of the rest of the country is also very telling as well.
Yeah, and I just want to say, and then we'll move to the mirror story. The energy of these protests is not we need a two-state solution. The energy of these protests is from the river to the sea, Palestine will be free. And the madness is that the reason that there's no consequences for these students is that faculty run the administrative and discipline process, and that the faculty support from the river to the sea, Palestine will be free. The faculty at Harvard, the faculty at Columbia, the faculty that runs these administrative proceedings actually agrees with the student protest. From the river to the sea, Palestine will be free. The faculty wants there to be Palestine freed. They have 6 books on their shelf. They're all from Palestine. The narrative that Israel exists for a reason, and it's moral, and its founding was moral, and it's not a perfect society. No society is. We certainly know that in America, but that is overwhelmingly moral. That's not a book they have on their shelf, and I just think it's madness to not name that. So
I think one more thing I want to clarify. Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe I'm part of the madness these days, but it's fascinating how our opinion, in a way, shifts, from one side to the other every week. What I'm saying is that it will be very interesting to see in the future, I hope not, in the future, if one of these universities decide to cut ties with Israel, if the protests will continue or not. If they don't continue, that means that the kids don't care about what happens in Israel and Palestine. It means that they don't want to study in a university that has ties with Israel. Yeah. All right? So that is different from Free Palestine, let's destroy Israel.
Eli,
if they're interested in this, is studying at the university has nothing to do with Israel, in a way it's different. Am I saying something wrong here? Am I mad as well?
I'm not getting you. If universities like Brown or Harvard, God forbid, divest from Israel, that's more than alarming. That's more than a heart attack. And we need to be shouting out from the rooftops that that's not okay. And what's particularly concerning about all this is now what you have on the table is that these students somehow have managed to have a dialogue with the leadership of the university, should we divest from Israel? That's unthinkable. That's very alarming.
Can you enlighten me, because I didn't grow up here in America, as everybody knows. What are the consequences of that?
Well, first of all, it's incredible reputational harm. If, God forbid, Harvard or Brown or Northwestern were to start divesting from Israel, what it's really saying is that Israel is a disgrace among the nations. It's not Or L'Goyim. It is a disgrace among the nations. And then Israeli professors are already being blackballed, and Israeli professors are already not allowed to come and teach, etc. It's saying that Israel and Israelis are beneath contempt. So it's reputational harm, not to mention financial harm. I mean, Israel's economy is already super challenged from this war. And if all of a sudden anybody who invests in Israel is tarred and feathered and blackballed, and we're going to divest from that, that would be I mean, if the Rosenberg family all of a sudden had no income coming in, that would be a problem for the Rosenberg family. And if Israel all of a sudden has everybody who is doing business with it stops doing business with it because it's a disgrace among the nations, that's a death knell to Israel. So it's literally existential. It's literally existential. I wanna just, with our last time, I want to look at the last parable, which is the need for mirrors. And Michelle, this is on page 8 of the handout. Could you read the need for mirrors and we'll talk about what it means?
Sure. From Once There Was a Man? Once there was a man who was so forgetful that when he awoke in the morning, he didn't know what to do with the strange objects he found in his room. Every morning saw him painstakingly trying to determine what each item of clothing was for, looking them up in research books, and finally putting them on correctly. This took him hours, and he was always late for work. One day, he decided to label everything in his house. He did so, and the next morning when he awoke, he looked around. Following the label's instructions, he dressed quickly. He recognized a chair from its note and sat on it quickly. He saw the note on his socks and put them on quickly. Then, as he was leaving, his eye fell on the mirror by the door. He looked in the mirror and froze. Bewildered, he whispered, "But who am I?"
So, what is the meaning of this mirror parable?
Well, if you associate this story with the first story, in a way, by entering madness, you forget who you are.
I read it differently. I read it that the difference between external and internal validation, that this man goes through a process, and when he goes through a process of discovery, authentic discovery of all of the objects in his house, he knows who he is and he can go out into the world. It takes him a long time, but he has the ability to understand and build that understanding and go out in the world. But
This is a chair, those are socks.
Yeah, but when he takes external reality, when he has this imposed reality of this is what is, he can function really quickly. He can do all the things he's supposed to do, but he has no sense of himself and no sense of meaning, and he can't function in the world. And so it's this, I think, this external, internal thing, which is really profound and real for us, which is that we can't, this is teaching our children. We can't teach our children by saying, this is how you believe. We have to lead our children to have an authentic experience of what they believe so that they can go out and be productive members of society.
The
So
newly
for
mother,
me,
the newly mother is talking.
No, but I think we have to teach kids to think. We can't just teach them what to think.
So for me, I'm taken with the gloss that Professor Wiesel puts on it for the students, and it really speaks to me about what our role is here. You know, you speak about the threat of BDS. By the way, I read a very reassuring article today by a Harvard law professor on the likelihood of that BDS moving. I wish I remembered the name that I could share with you right now, but it brought me a sense that that all the things that I fear may not necessarily come to pass. And to me, I think this second story speaks to the idea that even in our discomfort and our losing ourselves here, that the answer to that losing ourselves is to go deeper into who we are. It might be the task of the protesters all around universities to try to tell a story that they're telling. My job is to look to my books and to tell my story and our story as Jews, and to tell it as loudly as I can. So write that letter to the bookstore and tell them to tell our stories, because that's our role.
So Michelle, thank you for that. I mean, this, and I think the shot of the story is, and the way that Ariel Burger frames it in the book, is the need for mirrors, that in the midst of all this complexity, we need a source of values that reminds us of who we are. What are our best values on our best day? And we need a source that's unchanging, an unchanging source of covenantal values. Call it Torah, etc. And here's my question. When you look at, I mean, this past week was Yom HaZikaron and Yom HaAtzmaut. When you look at Israel's Declaration of Independence, that the language of the Declaration of Independence, which I don't have in front of me, but is the effect that all the inhabitants of the land will be treated with justice and fairness, and I think it even says the biblical prophets of Israel, that Israel will be a light unto the nations, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And the values are so beautiful, and for lots of complicated reasons, the reality is not what the values are. What do you do with that divergence, with the gap between the values in our mirror and the reality in the world?
I think we keep looking in the mirror, keep studying our texts, keep trying to plant the possibility of a world where those values can be realized, understanding that there are real threats out there and there are real challenges that prevent us from being able to fully realize in our time all the things that we would hope to realize.
So, colleagues, I want to close out by talking about your neshama and my neshama and our neshama. I'm struck by the fact that the first two parables, the parable and the alternative about the tainted grain, are Rabbi Nachman of Bratslav. And Rabbi Nachman of Bratslav also is the one who gave us Kol ha'olam kulo gesher tzar ma'od v'ha'ikar lo lefachet klal. All the world is a narrow bridge, and the most important thing is not to fear, which is how we have been ending Shabbat Alive since October 7th. When you take into account the enormity of this moment, the madness, the struggles with the madness, the difficulty of, even if we can figure out what our mirror is, that it's so sobering when you look at the mirror and you read the Declaration of Independence of Israel and you look at the newspaper, and what do you do with that chasm? So I want to ask you how you are how is your neshama doing in a world of madness and in a world of chasm between mirror and reality, and how do we actually do what Rabbi Nachman asks us to do, which is lo lefachet klal, not to be afraid.
It's a very hard question.
Wes, how are you feeling about that?
Really struggling with it. I'm really struggling. I mean, I'm 62. I've lost all four of my parents. I've never had such a hard season. All of my dreams are nightmares every night. Every night I have a dream that's a nightmare. And so I'm really struggling with how, like, when we were in Bentonville and I saw in the heart of red America, I mean, it's a blue dot in red America, but Arkansas is red America. And I saw 6 books, all to the effect of Israel has no right to be. I'm like, oh my God. And so I just continually, so I'm really struggling with, I get Rabbi Nachman's tainted grain metaphor, I get madness, I get the need for mirrors and the challenge with mirrors. I'm really struggling on lo lefachet klal. And I realize, by the way, we have it easy. We have it easy. The people who have it hard are Israeli soldiers and Israeli families. And, you know, if you talk to anybody in Israel, as I'm sure you did on Yom HaZikaron, we were talking to our family on Yom HaZikaron from Bentonville. It was just the most grief-stricken Yom HaZikaron. They have it much worse than we have it, obviously. So I really struggle with how do you do this. When you sing the song for that moment that you sing it, and we're in shul, and it's Friday night, and it's beautiful, for a moment I feel lo lefachet klal. It's very hard for me to hold on to that during the week.
I'm a little bit in a different place.
Please.
I don't have fear. I'm not a person that experiences fear because of my life story. Unfortunately, I wish I would have grown up like you guys with no experiences like this. It reminds me in '94 when the Jewish Community Center was bombed, and there was so much desolation in the Jewish community. I would go to sleep at night and think, what is next? Is my synagogue going to be bombed? Am I going to survive this? You know? So in a way, the experiences growing up in Argentina built a shield on me that I carry with me all the time. So I'm not in a position of fear, but I'm really concerned for my kids, for the future of my kids.
I think when you posed the question and our lack of response is that I think that was indicative of the fact that all of us are struggling and not really sure where to go with it. So my own personal neshama is, I think, similar to Elias. You know, I'm usually and almost always a hopeful person, but I am, thinking about the future, like what Emma's future will be like, as moving forward as a young Jewish adult in an America that seems to be, in a lot of ways, moving away from core values, and also the struggle that we're all having in terms of understanding Israel's response, which at first seemed more reasonable, and the longer this war goes on, the more complex it becomes, and it is a struggle.
We have to catch ourselves. We are living in a time where the President of the United States gave a speech about anti-Semitism, about the importance of combating anti-Semitism. We live in a country where we are sending billions of dollars of aid to Israel to support Israel. There was not a pause in support. There was recently, but the overarching position of our country has been one of support for Israel. We live in a country where our government representatives are having hearings about anti-Semitism on campus. We live in a place where the mayor cares enough to have a conversation with us about an exhibit that's happening in the library. We cannot give ourselves over to this loss of hope and everything is terrible. It's tough, but our people have been through worse. And I think that we have real work to do to hold on to hope and to hold on to our life force. This does not help us. This does not help our community. We have to remember we have been through this before. We've dealt through this with this before. We will make it through. There is hope, and it's important to hold on to that hope.
Alisa, can I say something? Beautiful what you said, but it's very different depending what situation you're living. Having your phone on a regular weekday night, watching your son until he gets to his dorm, it could be a terrifying experience. Totally. So we have to make room for that.
And I think that when, a piece of this, of course, is the trauma of our history. We've seen where this story can go. And so we are heightened in our anxiety because...
Didn't you once give a sermon about intergenerational trauma? Yeah.
That's why we have to stop with the cherries.
Right,
stop with the cherries.
Because this moment really can lead down. If those 6 books are left as the only story, then it's only a matter of time, right? We need to be in that conversation. And to me, I lost something really important that I've been struggling to gain back, which is I always felt like somebody who broadly understood our world and could put things into categories. And the thing that really resonated with me about this piece that you brought was a sense, not so much of the particular madness, whatever the particular madness is and what we call it, but the idea of feeling like you are adrift in a world that you can't put rational categories on, that choices are being made that you thought would lead from point A to point B, but they're at point Z instead, and all of that are just routinely surprising and alarming all at once. And to that, I just want to say thank you for bringing this text, because it was so profoundly challenging, but also so inspiring to me to think that Elie Wiesel encountered that world, and he came out with a message and with a new way for us to make sense out of our world. And to me, that being lost in the confusion pushes me to a place of faith. It pushes me to a place where I read this story and I say, I don't know, just like there's the question that did Rabbi Nachman anticipate the world that would shape the world in his lifetime, or did he not? We don't know the answer to that, but I do know that there is the very fact of not knowing what will be enables me to say that perhaps there is a place for our faith and our hope even at this hard time.
Thank you. Could you end the class by singing together Kol Ha'olam Kulo?
Let's do it together. Kol ha'olam kulo, gesher tzar me'od, gesher tzar me'od, gesher tzar me'od, kol ha'olam kulo, gesher tzar me'od, gesher tzar me'od, והעיקר לא לפחד כלל, והעיקר לא לפחד